mic, you actually angle it like this.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. It's nice to see Lompa in his quasi-retirement. I think all of us are so grateful that he's put so much energy forth and the whole Sangha to create this rather magnificent place. So may your retirement be beautiful, healthy, long. I'm also trying to figure out retirement. I think I'm 72, you're 70? 70, so it's time. I think we've both been a part of 5 startups. So I asked Lompa Liam, what do you think of retirement? He said, the Buddha never retired. Lompa Liam answered. Anyway, it's grand to be here. To create anything in the world, I think we all know how difficult it is. Just to manifest a car payment and then to have the perseverance for a community, both lay and monastic, to put this into the universe, into this culture. I mean, it's magnificent. It's a very difficult thing to do. So much my compliments to everyone and my gratitude for the good work you're doing. I've been thinking about stories a lot recently. Perhaps because my story is probably winding down. There's more behind me than in front of me, I'm sure. My dad died at 74, I'm 72. Mom lived to be 96, so who knows? But the thoughts of death are definitely interesting for me. Not in a morbid way, but in a more like curious way. But being of this age, people quite often ask me my story, and I repeat my story again and again and again and again and again and again. So over 45 years as a monk, I've heard the same story quite a lot. It gets a bit longer every year. And after a while, I think, did that really even happen? Because I don't even have any memories of it all. But that's the story I tell. It's a good story. So I kind of accept it. And we all live in stories, don't we? We live in cultural stories. So I've been taken by the Buddhist story. And Christians live in the Christian story, and the Abrahamic religions live with the Old Testament, New Testament, the Quran, Ramayana, Mahabharata. And I was thinking about the stories. We're kind of the actors in our story, but we seem to be writing the script too. And it seems like we're directing it. And then these horrible people come on stage too, the ghosts and all that. And also we seem to be the screen. And it's being the screen which is most interesting to me. That's a bit that really interests me. But to look at that part of our experience, it's good to write a good story and to live a good story. So I know for myself, before I came to Buddhism, my story was pretty random and not very focused and directed. And then when I met my first bhikkhu in India long ago, and I discovered the 5 precepts, that was a huge change, because suddenly my story had direction. It had ethical direction, it had value. It had meaning. It had meaning. Whereas before that, meaning was, there was searching. I was searching for silence and peace, like all of us, I suppose. But there wasn't the kind of concrete direction. And it seemed like events were writing the screenplay. And I seemed to be a sort of player, a bit player in all this. And then once that idea of precepts and commitment to moral guidelines became paramount, then all of a sudden the whole tone of the story changed. It does, doesn't it? And when you have direction, then you have meaning. When you have meaning, you have a certain amount of happiness. Happiness is a funny thing. There's the happiness of consumption. So you have a nice meal, or it's sunny outside on a cold day and you feel warm. So those are experiences of happiness which don't have much depth to them. They're nice. I like them. Good meal's nice. Nothing wrong with it. But then there's other levels of happiness which we can write into our story and be a part of our story. And so, Apple, you don't mind me talking about you, do you? It's all good. So you know that Yom Apple does these flowers. And every year I come to a great function and there's Yom Apple creating. I mean, it's beautiful, isn't it? It's just gorgeous. And she's so happy. And then I'm happy because she's happy. Mudita. Now, that's a nice story. And that's different than eating an ice cream cone. It's a different kind of happiness, isn't it? It's not the happiness of consumption, although I consume the experience of looking is a consuming experience, not consumed by it. It is an experience which is pleasant, right? But there's a whole lot of depth there, isn't there? There's the depth of, well, she had to buy the flowers. So to get the flowers, she had to work. So there's self-sacrifice. And then the talent and skill of actually creating that. So you have to, and that's a joy, isn't it? To have some talent and skill to be able to do something well, whatever it is. And then to offer it on a beautiful day to beautiful people. And then there's the joy of that. And that joy is much, much deeper than if she just bought a rose and plunked it on her. Huh? And so we have these levels of happiness and joy which we can be part of our script. We can do that, can't we? And certainly the Buddha is asking us or suggesting, do joy. Create the opportunities for happiness. So direction, meaning, generosity, these create a lovely story. And what we do in Theravada Buddhism, maybe all cultures, is we seem to rewrite the story every week almost. Or we remember the script every fortnight for the monks. We have what we call the Patimokkha, where we recite our rule, where we reflect on our rule, we reflect on our relationships, we reflect on our commitment. And that's, for me, that's script writing. And why do it so often? I want to just do it once. Well, because we forget. And we're reminded of our life. And so lay people too. The taking of the 5 precepts again and again and again and again. What is that? That's always remembering what the parameters are of this play. The good parameters, the helpful parameters, right? What I also like about this monastic life is there's lots of choreography. Like the choreography of me bowing to Lone Paul before doing the talk. I love that. I really love that. And it's just this beautiful and graceful, because I love him and he's an inspiring figure to me. And I could just say, hey man, you want to talk or should I talk or something? We could do the Canadian thing too, which should be fine, which should be nice. And we do that maybe if we go camping. But these rituals that we have, Katina, we do that every year, right? And these are rich things in our culture, because in our Buddhist culture, because they create Kalyanamitta. And Kalyanamitta is certainly a very important way to make a happy life, isn't it? Because if you don't have friends, who can you give to? Like if Yom Apple didn't have friends, she couldn't make flowers for them. Right? If you don't have friends, you don't have a chance to serve, to give, to help. It's on your own. It would be sad. I know when I was caring for my mother, you could see one of the things she really missed was caring for others, because she didn't have the strength. She really, really missed that. And we need friendships for that. And then Kalyanamitta also is something that perhaps one of the worst players you want to walk on your play is a narcissist. That's the worst kind of actor to come into your play, because a narcissist has no capacity for self-reflection. They're merely consumed by their own self-evident superiority. So if you are a 5, they are a 10 in the scale of things. And narcissism is a state of mind which has no kalyanamitta, has no reflection. Most of us, I think, that come to this life have a healthy sense of self-disparagement. And we're lucky that way. You know, sometimes we think, oh, all this self-disparagement is not good, but a bit of self-criticism is very, very healthy, isn't it? Because we take responsibility and we look at how we want to make this narrative better and more beautiful and more meaningful. So the sense of self-criticism or self-disparagement is taken by Buddhism in a way where we direct it to the nature of our predicament rather than just criticizing our predicament or blaming it on someone else. And that's the capacity for self-reflection. Without this, Buddhism doesn't exist, really. If you cannot reflect on cause and effect, then you're stuck in causes which come at you and you don't know why, and the effects are there. So self-reflection then is what is it? It's the cinematography, isn't it? It's how you see this, how you see the situation, how you see the world. It's the photography. It's the viewing of the awakened mind. And we're constantly reminding ourselves of that, awaken to the way things are. It's like this, it's like this, it's like this. Now sometimes the narratives just go off the rail through no fault of your own. Loss, betrayal, all these houses that burned down on Tom Key Road. Boy, that changed so many people's narrative. And the ones that didn't have insurance, oh gosh, how did they deal with that? Huh? Sometimes the narrative really goes, it goes sour, it goes bad, it goes difficult. But if you have, if you have a kind of foundation of good script writing, you're always coming back to very foundational principles of morality and generosity, of responsibility and self-reflection. And these can carry you through. Deep losses and betrayals are very confusing, aren't they? You're getting blindsided by life in some kind of way. And it's very, very difficult, very, very confusing. Well, no, my parents were refugees from Latvia, they were in Germany in 1944. Imagine that. The war ended. For those of you who don't remember, the war ended in 45. So there they were. They were very well to do in Latvia, and then life just came at them in a way unasked for, and then they were refugees in Germany. My mother, a young woman, wandering around in a country full of war, but she's a very moral woman. Very, very moral woman, very good woman. Very high, kind of beautiful principles. And she gave birth to my brother in a town called Altheim, which was near Nuremberg, in March of 45. And I think the war ended in the summer of 45. So just before the war ended. And she remembers seeing bombers going over this little town, which was far from Nuremberg, but close enough that she could see the sky was black with bombers going over and then carpet bombing Nuremberg. Her village wasn't bombed, and she gave birth to my brother. And in the village, this was a small village, there were no men or no boys. Everyone had gone to war or were in factories or dead. And when she gave birth to a boy, all the village women were so happy. A boy! A boy, a boy. And they brought out all their baby clothes from their own children. So here is my mom in the middle of the war, and she's got diapers for the rest of the whatever, little sweaters and all the clothes she wanted. And so I always felt, there was something about her goodness, which was also a protection. Not guaranteed. She still lost her home and lost her culture, and was always sad about that. But there it was, her goodness somehow created goodness. And by living a life of responsibility and integrity, we do associate with those energies, don't we? So we see cruelty all around us maybe, or whatever, but we don't abide by the impulses of cruelty, and so we're protected in that way. And that's the idea of refuge and safety. What is safe? Well, you don't know. Tom Kai Road, your house might burn down. Now, this monastery didn't burn down. You don't know. But when we align with that kind of energy, which is good and wholesome, then that does attract those kinds of energies. It's just the way it works, isn't it? So the story that we write, to some extent, the script has been written as we start to take hold of the pen, right? When we're kids, we don't really know. We just kind of react to stuff. We get conditioned by parents and culture, and then suddenly we become self-reflective. We grow up. We may have the emotions still of adolescence when we're 32 or whatever, but we have taken charge of the script to some extent. And we start to write a happy story. But happiness not in a shallow way of just consuming things, but happiness which has depth and meaning. And that writing of a script, I would say, is like in a novel. You have character development, don't you? The characters get developed through the novel. Well, that's what the writing of our script is. It's character development, isn't it? We develop our character. And what is that? That's the parami, the virtuous qualities, right? So something like my mom, horrible war. And yet she remained a moral person. And she wasn't bitter. She was sad. In fact, when she died, or before she died, she said, "Can you take my ashes to the Atlantic?" I'm from Ottawa, so that's 1,000 miles. east, and put the ashes in the Atlantic and let them float to Latvia. I said, wow, is that ever poignant? Huh? Ever poignant? So I did it. But then I saved some of the ashes, and I took them to Latvia, and I saved some of the ashes, and I planted 2 trees, and I've still got a few ashes left. You can go a long way with human ashes. But just kind of reflecting on the kind of tragedy and sadness of her life, it didn't change her moral compass. It didn't make her bitter, right? She kept, and me becoming a monk, that was a bummer. How weird is that, right? And it took a long time to get over that. And yet she remained a loving person, because her moral compass is very good, very good. So the Buddhist teaching offers a whole kind of levels of happiness that we read about, we talk about. And there's the simple happiness of consumption, consuming something. And then there's the happiness of things you didn't do. The happiness of non-remorse, of not having remorse. That's something sometimes we don't realize when we live a good life. But just think of, things like Lompo Samedo would sometimes say, I'm really glad I didn't say a lot of things that I wanted to say. Non-remorse is a kind of happiness. We've all had that, haven't we? You want to say something, I'm not going to say it, you say it, you hate yourself. I'm not going to say it, and you don't say it. And you have restraint, and that's character, isn't it? Restraint, self-reflection, which isn't repressive, it's not judgmental, it's training, it's the development of character. And your story gets better, doesn't it? It's a happier story for not having said that or done that. So non-remorse is a source of happiness. Skills like making flowers or making furniture or singing or playing hockey, these are all skills. Human beings like to learn things, aren't they? We like to do things. We like to be creative. And that can be very, very rewarding, can't it? And especially if you can offer those skills to others. If you can make something, create something, and give that to someone else, that gives double joy. The highest happiness is, of course, the enlightenment of the Buddha. And we read about that in different ways. And then we read about levels of happiness which come about through meditation. And those kinds of happiness are when the heart really has this very, very strong sense of independence, where it's not dependent on objects. It's not dependent on the usual ways of happiness and unhappiness, comfort or security or beauty and things like that. It has a kind of inner beauty of its own. And that's why renunciation is possible, because we do have a possibility of inner silence, inner beauty, which is not dependent on objects or experiences, which is not really an experience per se. It's rather kind of a background that's always there. So one of the ways we can think about that is that when you're in the movie and you're watching, when you're kind of lost in the movie, you don't notice the screen. Or when if I read the text of this book, I see the print and I follow the words and I can't figure out the Pali pronunciation. And then what are those little squiggles up top? So I'm absorbed in the print, right? But also there's the page, the white of the page. I don't tend to notice that unless it's dirty. And then I think, who made that dirty? But actually, the space or the whiteness of the page is something that's always there. And the same with consciousness or awareness or knowing or different ways you might think about it. or talk about it, but you can't really say that's an object. Like this, like in this room right now, I see beautiful, what do we call those? Lampshades? Are they lamps? They're too big. Anyway, they're lovely. Right? And I see people, right? And then I feel temperature. I might hear the sound of the heater or something like that. You hear the sound of my voice, I hear the sound of my voice. And so my attention tends to be drawn to objects. So if someone's playing guitar outside, I notice that. Or the objects I tend to notice the most are thoughts. And thoughts are very consuming, aren't they? They're very, very compelling and addictive and so on and so forth. But what we don't, it's much more subtle, I would say, is that consciousness itself, or awareness itself, is necessary for this experience. You cannot have this experience of sight, sound, hearing, and so on if there were not consciousness or awareness or knowing. And we don't tend to question that. We don't tend to ponder, what is that? Because it's not an object. And we're not drawn to it in the usual way. We are drawn to happiness and unhappiness. So the task of the contemplative is, first of all, to write or try to live a happy enough story where the mind feels fulfilled, feels satisfied. Right? Because if you don't have that, like if you're hungry, you gotta eat. Right? If the fire's coming up the hill, you got to run down the hill. So that's a necessity. So actually, to contemplate the deeper possibilities of human experiences takes a lot of good karma. It takes a place like this and takes the intention. And then what? Well, then the attention is drawn away from objects to the nature of awareness itself. And this is much more subtle. Now, how can you do that? Well, one of the ways I like to do it, I do it several ways, pragmatic ways. I usually take two sense bases. So I usually use sound and touch. So like if I take sound and I listen, and then I squeeze my hands, maybe, or feel my hands. So I have to be centered. If I'm thinking about tomorrow's milkshake, it's not going to work. So I have to let go of thought, right? Or I have to let go of this preoccupation with objects. So I listen to sound. Now that's not something you think about. Listening is not thinking. And so there's some focus there. But not the focus to get anything, just what's sound like. And then I feel my hands. What's hands like? And then I can move between the two, sound, hands. And then I can say, well, what's changing? And then I can say what's unchanging. So in the experience of change, what is unchanging? What is unmoving? I find this very fruitful exercise because it's just sort of very apparent that there is movement, certainly, there is sense experience, but also there's the silence which underlies it. And it's not so far away, but you notice you have to put down thought. If you think about this, then you just, what's he talking about? Then you're not listening, right? What's have I got it? That's thought. So in the space of no thought, you listen and you feel. That's one way to do it. And you start to intuit that silence, and then that silence is always there. It's not an object you go out to, like the taste of sugar in your tea. It's not that. It's different. It's more like staying home, isn't it? You stay home, like this. It's like this. So Lompo Sumedo's constant refrain now, it's like this. Now apply that to something more difficult, like fear. So fear is an emotion, it's an object. It has a visceral component, it'll have a storyline component, right? Now, if it is a fear which is biologically important, the bear's coming, then you listen to the fear and you don't hug the bear. Or at least not in Ontario. Maybe you do it in California, I don't know. How many Californians does it take to hug a bear? So fear is natural, there's nothing right or wrong with it. But so much of our fears are really simply conditioned phenomena which have nothing to do with safety. Social fears, say. So the same, like you can listen to fear, you can feel fear, and then you can ask yourself, okay, is fear permanent? You have to look, not analyze, not think. You feel fear. What does feel like? Where is it? And you feel it. And you feel it's changing, vibrating. And you ask yourself, well, what's unchanging? And you notice the space of awareness is unchanging, and the fear is vibrating. Nothing right or wrong. So you start to even use this sort of more difficult tendencies of your story, of your narrative, the difficult bits of the script, to begin to see that even that's okay. Even the fear and anger, that's okay. Because the space makes no comment on those things. So Lompo Sumedo's other line he uses a lot is, it all belongs. And this is what the ideas of metta are about. Metta is goodwill, and usually we talk about that in a dualistic way. So I wish you well, metta. But also in a way of non-dualism, it's the way to see that awareness is kindness itself, because it accepts all things. How could it be otherwise? Awareness knows, because things arise and cease in awareness. And so metta becomes a more, I think, profound attitude once you see that. So then metta for fear or metta for whatever's going on is also awareness of it. It all belongs. It's like this. And it's a very simple practice which starts to it helps in the writing of the script a lot, right? Because there's a lot in the drama of our lives where we have to endure a lot, and we do have fears and angers, and our life is not easy. Oftentimes, life is tragic. The tragedies are quite common, really, when you ask any family, Alzheimer's or a youngster having drug addiction, or betrayal or serious loss. These are human. They're not uncommon. And to actually see that it's rather like my mother in the tragedy she had, that we as human beings, because we're self-reflective, we don't have to let the tragedy just define our lives, right? We can allow something else to define our lives. And I would say the definition I find most appealing is that my real home is that silence, rather than my real home being this body or my historical narrative or even the monastery. That my real home is that silence. And then from that real home does contain all things. And I often ask people, so what is your vision? Do you have a transcendent vision? Or is your vision is simply psychological, social? And does the kind of transcendent speak to you, or how do you use, what kind of language do you use that? People will say, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. And then I say, oh yeah? What do you mean? And they can never answer. Well, you know. No, I don't know. What do you mean by spiritual? I say, well, you know. And the beauty of Buddhism, it's a religious format, but it points very clearly to, I would say, a transcendent spiritual aspect of the human possibility, the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unformed, the end of suffering, peace, the highest happiness, And so the Buddha's realization was, he encouraged us to look at the stars, and this is what the imagery in religious imagery, you always find that there's that's even in Lion King. When we saw Lion King on the Delta flight from Detroit to, it was great. and the little Simba, I guess, that's the guy's name? He's looking up at the star. And what is that? That's Nibbana. And the guiding light, right? That's the transcendent. He's not an astronomer. Right? And so that kind of imagery exists in all cultures. So even the three wise men following the star. And so we as monastics, this is why we come into the order when we take the ordination determinations and we are accepted into the community in the language of that ordination is for the realization of Nibbana. We don't come for the floral arrangements, but we enjoy them. And we don't sign up for the food, right? But we enjoy it when it's offered. And so this aspiration to the transcendent means we really have to take hold of our lives and give them meaning and give them direction. And I would say that when you have difficulties and you can inform them with meaning, to me that is a very important part of life. Otherwise, life's just a bad joke, right? These things happen and you survive them, and what was that about? But in the development of character and development of parami, you give meaning to the very fears and disappointments and all that. You give it meaning by what? Well, by not getting reborn into it. By seeing that it's changing, but what's unchanging? You start to use that model, that paradigm. So nothing can fool you. So I'll finish there tonight.